What's going on, guys? Just give me a second to get the other chat up. And we are going deep into the rabbit hole of plant medicine today. We're going to talk about basically the state of what was supposed to be a movement. The general consensus is, I think, disappointment in the overall efficacy of not the compounds themselves, right? And I think this actually, unfortunately, relates more to plant medicine than the chemical psychedelics that are being used in clinical settings. And it's funny because I can remember in the 90s, the late 90s, during the first part of the psychedelic renaissance, the general consensus was that plant medicine, which was not very well known and it wasn't called that then, but natural psychedelics were better. This was the opinion of most hippies because they're hippies, I guess. I've never really felt that it was true myself. But again, it's not the compounds, it's the culture around it that has kind of derailed things. And it is oftentimes the product of good intentions by misguided people. It's actually a very complicated subject, and we're going to go a little deeper into that, but also into the mechanisms that allow these things to work, why it's also important still, regardless of the fact that some things may not have turned out the way that we would have hoped so far. You know, that we have work as a movement and a culture, things that need to be addressed and dealt with and re-engineered. And we have to take active responsibility for doing that. And so that's where we're going with this. Also, feel free to contribute and guide to the discussion if you have questions or things that you're curious about my opinion. I'll be happy to try to address them. And first, for those of you that might be new to the channel, let me check in with the chat too, because it is storming. I apologize. Yesterday I had this scheduled and a music stream. Rainy season in the Sacred Valley. Sorry, guys. I hate that. You know, people actually told me that they clear their calendar and get set up, and then I don't show up, and there's nothing I can do about it. The rainy season's almost over, so, you know, it won't always be like this. But anyways, yeah, that's what's going on with that. I am going to try to have the music stream after this, but it is looking pretty dark out there, so who knows. Okay, I don't see any complaints about the audio, so I'm going to assume we're good. And continue on. So first of all, my history with this stuff. The main focus of my channel and my life really is not actually psychedelics and plant medicine. They are a primary tool and an extraordinary catalyst for consciousness. They give us access to what have been labeled parapsychological phenomena, if intermittently, but for certain. You know, they're so many potential benefits in terms of expanded consciousness, resolution of trauma, you know, all this kind of stuff. But for me, the main utility of them really is expanding consciousness and kind of cultivating a sort of super intelligence, really, or at least enhancing our pattern recognition system to the extent that we are able to sort of decode the universe. And I think that focus has been disturbingly absent from the modern Renaissance in this. And so the reason I'm mentioning that in part is to set up my own story. The first time that I realized I was really interested in psychedelics, I think I was only 8 or 9 years old, and my dad came home tripping, and my mom didn't like it. And, you know, those of you that have seen my autobiographical videos know that I came from a pretty messed up background. And so they got in a huge fight. People ended up getting strangled and stuff, like not to death, but, you know. And I guess he was tripping and she hated it. And at first I heard her say, "You took acid." And I sat up in bed and I thought, I pictured a tube of battery acid and thought, why would he eat that? And then he's like, well, this girl just had some LSD and I just took a couple drops. And the fight just got worse and worse and worse. But when I heard the 3 letters LSD, this voice in my head was like, that is important. and I didn't really know why, but I like perked up. I didn't care about the fact that they were fighting, and I was like, LSD. I have to find out what that is. And so I guess in like sixth grade, someone had accidentally introduced a book called Flowering Plants into the elementary school library because it just had a picture of a morning glory and seemed innocuous. And in my opinion, it is innocuous, but it was about datura, mandrake, ayahuasca, all of these plants and the folklore associated with them. And it was really fascinating to me, lycanthropy blew my mind, which is probably where the werewolf story comes from. That basically during the potato famine, the potatoes were destroyed by a fungus, I think, or a blight. Probably a fungus, because I think blight more affects leaves. And so all they had were leaves. But it turns out that if you eat potato leaves, you'll get lycanthropy, which is a condition where you will sleepwalk sometimes, or at least dream that you are a predatory animal, that you transform into a wolf, or usually a wolf for some reason. And so people would run around howling and, sort of werewolf, obviously Irish sounding word. And that's the story of where werewolves come from, supposedly. And another one that blew my mind was the witches with the mandrake and belladonna and other poison path plants with scopolamine and atropine. Scopolamine is used for motion sickness, and atropine is used to restart the heart. There are other applications of various tropane alkaloids, not really recommended for tripping. Toei or Floripondia has a bunch of names, really. Brumansia, Angel's Trumpet, Devil's Trumpet. It's a little bit more mild. It's still dangerous. But if you use the flowers, for example, for insomnia and inflammation, it's like the best thing there is. But you really need to know what you're doing. Anyways, they made a flying ointment out of the roots of like datura, datura stramonium, datura metalloides, and mandrake and deadly nightshade and all these things. And they would put it on the end of a broomstick and apply it to the vaginal walls. And I guess people would stumble upon these groups of witches with broomsticks between their legs, hollering about how they're flying. And this is where the popular image of a witch riding on a broomstick actually comes from. I mean, I could go on with this lore. There's all sorts of just incredible historical facts, and little things in our world that most people don't know were actually influenced by these plants. So anyways, that initiated my lifelong interest in this stuff. And I think also I knew that because I was damaged from a severely messed up household and violent neighborhood, lots of murders all around, all the time as I was growing up, inbred people, dangerous pit bulls, bad. I think I intuitively knew that I was going to need some help and that psychedelics would provide that help. And it's true that they did. To an extraordinary extent. In fact, I did, as is expected, grew up with some, violent temper problems and various emotional issues that presented as extremely toxic behaviors in relationships. And, it was quite a mess in like my early 20s. And through self-administration of psilocybin and other mostly psilocybin. Eventually, I was able to work all those things out without any therapy. Yeah, so and it wasn't a cure-all. I still struggled a lot, over the years. In my 30s, I had health problems that led to addictions with pills and whatnot, and all sorts of things. I ended up in prison at one point for a short period of time and over something stupid, but still, I did go to prison. And the thing that I realized eventually is that when I gravitated away from these psychedelic compounds, I would end up losing my way, because the trauma was really severe. And the influence would more or less entirely be mitigated if I took, say, mushrooms twice a month or something, And even though it didn't completely resolve everything, instantly. That's an unrealistic expectation, by the way, and something that a lot of people criticize psychedelics and say, well, when you come down, that's not true. Studies have shown that the benefits are retained 5 years later on average, especially if the context is correct, that they're administered in the proper manner, to the proper medium, to the proper object. If you fulfill the postulate, then the results will be consistent. So, the influence of these things, even though they weren't completely annihilated, were still lessened, despite the fact that if I strayed from the path, I often would find myself back in some kind of trouble. So, eventually, I ended up reading the Psychedelics Encyclopedia like 3 times, which is, I think, like 1,000 pages long, more or less memorizing it. The fascination continued throughout my life, and eventually I ended up studying ayahuasca and other plant medicines with various tribes and shamans in South America. And so that continues to this day. Now we're in the Sacred Valley, and we are having events for very, very small groups. So if you are interested in that, shoot me an email. We don't have a lot of space, but I don't like to do big groups anyways, one-on-one, or working with a couple, or a group of 3 to 5. That's, I don't think it's really appropriate to go beyond that. Let me check in with the chat one more time and see if anybody's... Slight frame drop? Yeah, that's the weather. That's probably the weather. I don't normally stream in the middle of the afternoon on Sundays, so I wasn't sure if it's a good idea or not. And we are indeed a small group, but it doesn't matter. That much, I guess. What was I talking about? Yeah, so speaking of South America and plant medicine, I got very lucky, and I didn't really work with commercial entities at all for the first 6 years. I never even saw that. I didn't even know that there was an ayahuasca industry when I first got involved with it. Certainly when I was studying it as a child, there was no such thing. I don't think it really started until the early 2000s that was that it was a commercial industry. I actually know Carlos Tanner a little bit, who is the founder of the Ayahuasca Foundation, and he is pretty much responsible for having commercialized ayahuasca. And I don't hold that against him. He didn't mean to. But he could be the first person to have turned it into a sort of business for gringos. And as soon as I guess it was in Pucallpa, where I first started to be exposed to plant medicine people that had been doing the more or less the corporate circuit, what do you call it? I can't even remember the names of any of those places. You guys know what I'm talking about. Rhythmia is one. These kind of places that are really cults run by narcissists. They have ridiculously large ceremonies. There is no preparation for people. There isn't proper integration. And I've heard stories of one shaman overseeing groups of over 100 people with a couple of facilitators, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that there is no shaman on the face of this earth, at least not that I've seen, that can handle processing energy for that large of a crowd. It's definitely not good. And so after years of working with this shaman, who still to this day I think charges $40 per person, and you can't find him on the internet. He's not interested in commercialization. You have to know someone. It's all word of mouth, right? So that was all I knew of it. And I was only one of the only people that wasn't Czech, because he almost entirely works within a circle of the same Czech people. So when I get to Pucallpa and I start meeting these people that have been through this ayahuasca industry type processing, I noticed that there were some serious problems, that people thought they were getting help when they weren't. I noticed that the influence of superstition was kind of completely derailing what could be productive healing sessions to a large extent. And it was really kind of disappointing over time also coming here to PSOC. You know, when you meet the people that run the retreats and whatnot, it's oftentimes appalling. In fact, the first time I took a group to see a shaman that was here because I knew his family lineage. I know his uncle and his mom, and they have, most of them have a very good reputation, the Mahuas. They're Shipibo. And they had advertised that they were serving Noya Rao, which is questionable in and of itself because it appears that what it really is a bioluminescent fungus that grows on the leaves of certain trees. It's not actually a tree. It might be, you know, and there's arguments from different lineages, you know, whether the Mahua's Noya Rao is really actually Noya Rao even, or whether it's just confusion and that they think that this bioluminescent fungus is a type of tree. I don't think the Shipibo missed the mark like that personally. But it is true that, you know, maybe you would say, well, maybe it's the fungus itself. Well, no, because they used the tree, you know, not the leaves, primarily. So they said they were going to be serving it, and I was really interested in that just in case, because I know that Mahua's lineage is likely the correct plant, and it is said to be able to catalyze enlightenment sometimes in a single dose, you know, like Buddha level or whatever. That's the legend of the what is it called? The Path of Truth, or the Path of Truth. And I actually ended up standing next to one on ayahuasca, one of my first ayahuasca experiences, and I noticed the glowing leaves all around the ground, and I realized what it was. And this is actually an interesting diversion. I guess it's worth it. I was standing at the base of this tree, and it was very misty, and out of the mist, up in the Noya Rao tree, right, the tree of light, this entity starts like swirling down from the canopy, and I could tell it was going to land like directly in front of me. And it had a very familiar looking like rectangle eye and a very round, you know, I knew it was some kind of sun god entity. And it wasn't until last year that I realized it was Inti, the sun god of the Incas. I was actually driving from Cusco to Pisac, and I saw a guy walking down the road with the face I'd seen on the back of his cape. And I pulled over and I was like, hey, what is that on the back of your shirt? And he's like, it's Inti, the sun god. And I was like, God damn, you know, the tree of light, and Inti comes floating down. And I didn't know what Noya Rao was or who Inti was at the time. So that's weird, you know, that the sun god's hanging around the tree of light in the middle of the jungle or whatever. But anyways, it turned out that the facilitator was lying, that they put on the poster, you know, we'll have Noya Rao tea, but they didn't have Noya Rao tea. And I knew you were supposed to have a dieta first, but I thought, well, maybe they're just serving a small amount, and, you know, but no. And when I brought it up, the shaman was sitting next to her and he looked totally baffled. So he didn't even know that she was false advertising in order to draw this crowd there and then acting like it was a misunderstanding. And this kind of thing has become typical, you know, and I'm basically using it as an example because it brings up a very important question. If these things truly reduce ego and they allow us to attenuate ourselves to a higher mind, and, you know, that process should sort of extricate us from the influence of greed and dishonesty and all of these other things. Clearly, that doesn't always happen. So, you know, what is the true reality behind psychedelic medicine? What is really going on? What is the real happy medium between the excessive optimism and the abject pessimism? I think there is an answer. Let me look at the chat again. Sorry, guys. I can't keep the, from Australia, 8:30 a.m. first broadcast about alchemy, right on. awesome to hear. I have a lot of actually people in Australia that watch, which is wild to me because it's please donate money to Lex Cherry. What happened to Lex Cherry? I do know the person he's talking about. I also am in need of support right now because I have multiple surgeries, and we just found out that you sew it in there. I can't remember what it's called. It's the stuff that going to put my intestines back where they're supposed to be, like a screen, sort of a mesh. Yeah, I have to have two meshes replaced and then some reconstruction inside of my jaw. So that's kind of a pain in the ass. But at least hit the like button, share the videos, support Lex if something happened. I'm assuming he posted that because something did, and he's a good guy. So, isn't he back in the U.S.? What was I saying? Yeah, like button, share, subscribe, consider becoming a patron. You get access to our community Discord where we have private chats for the people at $10 tier and higher, and 6 years of premium content. You can also make one-time contributions to the things in the chat, the little thingies, the crypto address and whatnot. And also, it's in the video descriptions, and we appreciate it because we're demonetized and we get no assistance for this. So, what I'm getting at here is that there is a constituency of people, and I know I've ended up talking mostly about ayahuasca. We're probably going to have to make this a series and get into like individual plants and chemicals one at a time. But there's a constituency of people that seem to have a motive where they want to sort of frame ayahuasca as this vegan agended, this entity that has it wants you to not eat any meat, even though we now know that there are plants that are more sentient than animals and can count, which a cow cannot do, and recognize relatives, which only a mother cow does for a little while, but it definitely doesn't know its cousins like certain plants. You know what I mean? Non-neural intelligence is a fact now. So that doesn't make sense right out of the gate. And it's not true. And also that it wants to make you peaceful and all of this kind of stuff. And those things can be true. And I am not in any way saying that we should not embrace, peace, being peaceful and kind. You know what I mean? I'm not saying that, but reality is what we need a fat dose of right now, right? So, the Shuar, for example, who I primarily learned about ayahuasca from, are straight up warriors. And even, I almost said worse, that's not bad. But in the context of the modern world, it's inappropriate, to behead your enemies and sew their eyes and nose and mouth holes shut and shrink their head and stuff. And they say ayahuasca taught them to do this. They also will eat monkeys right after a ceremony. It's nothing like what the commercial ayahuasca narrative would have you believe. And a large reason for that is, who do you think spearheaded this movement? Hippies. A lot of whom are vegan pacifists, right? So the reality is, I think, that ayahuasca and any other psychedelic will adapt you to your circumstances and make you better at what you are. Unless there is someone there that has greater wisdom than you, that has deeper training in psychology, that not only understands this stuff themselves, but can teach you how to apply this knowledge to yourself actively through practices of mindfulness and self-psychoanalysis and other similar techniques, right? You need to be taught to be your own shaman in order to really heal from this stuff and to create yourself, to engineer yourself in congruence with your highest perception of what you're supposed to be, right? In the absence of that, if you are, say, a real estate agent from the San Fernando Valley in California, and you're basically a yuppie narcissist, and you are vapid and without purpose, and you have a tremendous ego, blah blah blah, et cetera, and you go to see a traditional shaman that doesn't even speak your language, and maybe you have an interpreter even, and you are told a bunch of stuff about spirits that doesn't really mean anything to you, and then you're given a bunch of ayahuasca. Now you are the same person, mostly, but with ayahuasca earplugs, and you think you're superior to everyone else. Without the proper context, it will just make you more what you are. It will amplify those characteristics. And why is that? These flaws in our personality, in our being, they're tied to our survival. They are defense mechanisms, they are strategic adaptations that allow us to navigate a very toxic society. And so when you amplify the brain and increase the connectivity and give it more presence to communicate with you, especially the subconscious where all your trauma resides, it's going to make adaptations that make you more fit for survival, not necessarily a better person. Sorry, it's just true, And of course, this isn't always the case. There are exceptions to every rule. Every person is an individual, singular, dynamic entity, right? And for one person that was a, antisocial, bipolar, fucking whatever list it is, that person may be just instantly cured. That happens sometimes. People take one dose, even of LSD or something, and they're just better. And in my own case, I was able to do this work myself because as a very young child, I read Timothy Leary's, 8-circuit model of consciousness and psychology, Robert Anton Wilson's Prometheus Rising and Cosmic Trigger and all of these kind of things. I read Jung in my early 20s. Somehow missed the whole synchronicity thing. And Freud and more modern works, and I learned to apply these things to myself, and I cultivated a mindfulness practice, and I just have the disposition to be able to do that kind of analytical work. One of the things I'm suggesting about the results that we've gotten from plant medicine, most people are not doing that. We have not only an extremely intense, I guess, anti-intellectual strain in our culture, especially in the United States, which is mind-boggling to me. It's a terrible thing. But we also have this kind of attitude that reason and logic have no place or purpose in spirituality. That in order to develop and cultivate that, you must abandon those things. And I think that has been damaging on multiple fronts. It has created the perception that spirituality is for idiots because you have all these anti-intellectual people, anti-science people, all this kind of stuff, disregarding logic and just generally acting like fools, and also taking a bunch of plant medicine and still obviously being a fake vapid narc or whatever. You know what I mean? It's problematic on multiple fronts that we kind of have this influence. And I would also say I don't want to get too much into paranoid conspiracy theories or whatever, this isn't. It's just a matter of social engineering. The separation of intellectual development and spiritual growth is deliberate because they're not only not mutually exclusive, they are fundamentally integral to each other in terms of making each other have real substance and purpose, Science and logic devoid of an understanding of the holistic integration of consciousness in every facet of the universe, for example, has kind of left it adrift, And there have been biases that have been built into the substructure of it, so that right now, the institution of science is staring this reality of a universal mind right in the face, and the individual researchers are doing everything they can to avoid acknowledging it. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, look up Stuart Hameroff and Penrose's Orc theory of consciousness, Michael Levin's work on morphology and bioelectricity, and the response-based adaptations in plants, animals, reptiles, that are basically devolving adaptations, devolving characteristics, so that humans don't kill them, that they couldn't possibly understand, especially the trees. You know, that alone is basically proof of some sort of intelligence integrated into the substrate of the system that has oversight and evolution. There's like no way around that, you know, and yet they're trying so hard. Like, there must be an unknown biological mechanism in the elephants. Like, come on, man, really? You guys are supposed to be objective here. Like, why are you so determined? Anyways, you know what I mean? And that's really the solution I gave on both ends of the spectrum, is that we have to integrate the gains from modern society, from the, you know, the disciplines of psychology and therapy and cognitive science and all of this stuff, into the ancient practices that I'm not saying are invalid. You know, it is true that there are shaman. And although I hesitate to use that word for myself, indigenous people do, that I know. So, you know, call me a facilitator if you like, but, you know, this is something that I've done myself, and I know that it's real. Sometimes you can just extract energy from a person and fix it in that way. But generally speaking, there is a incongruency. There is a schism between the culture that a Shipibo person comes from and someone from New York City. You know, a young upper class Jewish princess from Brooklyn has a completely different strata, you know, of psychological and emotional constituents. And I'm not saying that there's not any benefit from going to see someone that is purely traditional for that person. But in the context of applying these things to people from those cultures, you have to integrate both approaches. Otherwise, it's potentially doing more harm than good. Is that enough said about? No, it's not. Oh, my back is kind of hurting. While we're on the subject of ayahuasca, though, I just want to mention that something that has bugged me for years now is the lack of focus on parapsychological phenomena like telepathy and precognition and all of this. And I have seen it so many times. I have personally received information about Sirius that included astrophysical details that I did not. There's no way I knew them, and there's no way I guessed, because no one on earth knew them at the time. And there are witnesses. I'm sure that it happened. There's no doubt about it. You know, things like that. And then actually I found out that there's actually a tribe that claims to communicate with information about this star system also when they drink ayahuasca, the sequoia, and the star system in question is Sirius. You know, and it goes all the way back to I think like the 1500s or so, late 1500s, when Sir Walter Raleigh was talking to a shaman in the Amazon, and the shaman said, "I can know anything when I drink the vine." And the shaman says, "Your sister is dead, unalive, sorry, algorithm, God." And she had died the day before he said that or something. And so, you know, and there's just tons of those kind of like shamans that could describe places in China and the Eiffel Tower and the pyramids and whatnot, and there's no way in hell they had ever left the jungle or seen a television. We're talking like the 1940s and 50s, barely contacted people. And then in a clinical setting, masters in Houston, who are PhD medical doctors, had heard about telepamine and telepathine, which are now called tetrahydroharmaline, and you know, they're I don't know which two harmala alkaloids they were. Harmaline and tetrahydroharmaline, I think. back then were called telepathy and telepamine. And it's because of this. And so in 1966, masters in Houston thought, well, we should try to figure out if this is true, because, it appeared in unconnected accounts from around the same time. So the chances that these people had even influenced each other with their stories was pretty goddamn low. And so, in fact, Richard Evans Schultes had stories like that, and he was lost in the jungle, I think, for 12 years. And so a lot of these accounts emerged while he was lost in the jungle, and then he comes out talking the same jive. So, so they did experiments, and they they had, I think it was a 13 or 30 huge building, and the subjects were separated by an excessive number of floors. And one party was looking at a drawing of like really, really random stuff to discourage the possibility of guessing correctly. I remember one was like a skier skiing down a mountain that was on flames with a UFO hovering above him. And the accuracy of the people that had drank in the ayahuasca, and we're not even talking about trained shamans, was like 99% or something insane like that. And so unfortunately that year, research was shut down. And it seems to me that possibly in the interest of trying to rehabilitate the perception of psychedelics, people don't really want to, get into this kind of research because it's considered flaky or whatever. But I think it's tragic that we're not putting energy into that. I mean, I have a tremendous number of stories of. In fact, I'll share one more real quick. That this is just wild. It was early in my drinking career, I guess, and I was on the deck in this jungle with the guy that I worked with the most for years and years and years, and I had my eyes closed, and I realized I could kind of see through my forehead, and it was orange, as if I was looking through bone and blood, And I saw a mosquito flying and land, and then it bit me, and I realized, like, holy shit, I actually saw that mosquito, and my eyes are closed. And so I sat up with my eyes closed, and I scanned everything, and it all looked like, seeing through the center of my forehead, everything's tracking, like I move my hands in front of my face, and I'm thinking, okay, the mind is probably powerful enough to generate all this and track it properly. So the next morning, I go downstairs, and the first thing the shaman says to me is, sometimes you can see through your forehead when you drink the medicine. And I'm like, good morning, And so if you think about the idea of pineal gland activation and its association with sixth sense type phenomena, that instance kind of two birds, one stone, like it was an instance of telepathy. And it also addressed directly the fact that I was seeing through. So I went home and checked. Pineal gland is connected to the neovisual cortex and has rods and cones. It's an eye. In fact, when we close your eyes and you still see, that's probably what it is. The eidetic visuals that we get, especially when we eat mushrooms and whatnot, are probably perceptions of the third eye. So, yeah, I think that more or less covers the ayahuasca segment of this. Come to Ecuador and enjoy ayahuasca in San Pedro. Well, I lived in Ecuador for a number of years. Australia. Lex. Okay, so I still don't see any questions or comments in the chat. So let's jump into something, I guess, almost out of left field. Combo. And, mostly with these streams, I'm trying to contribute things that I don't see everywhere. There's no point in going over the same old stuff, right? So, combo. This is something that I never really had much confidence in because I took it several times and didn't really, I suffer from chronic fatigue syndrome and other chronic issues, and I didn't really notice anything. So I didn't really think too much about it. And over the years, I saw more and more research emerging, and the evidence that it actually can shrink tumors, and just for various applications that seem almost completely unrelated, which actually makes sense because the how do you say, the spectrum of bioactive compounds in the frog's venom is incredibly diverse. The big question always was, are they really in sufficient quantities to have any specific medical efficacy? And the answer apparently is yes, they absolutely are. And so I cannot prove a definite connection to this, but I think it's worthwhile for anyone to at least hear and be aware of. I had a client who came here that had stage 4 cancer. She was mostly better already, but I think, with that kind of degree and that stage of cancer, the possibility of, how do you say it? Like, it's the opposite of remission, a relapse, or, I don't know how to put it, is, and I think it's also always kind of present, if sort of dormant at that point. And she had a couple of, maybe even just one combo. I can't remember if it was one or two. I think it may have just been one. And also coca leaves, and we're not sure which exactly. Oh, and also kushuru, which I should mention because it has cyanotoxins in it that cause cells to not be able to replicate, which means that if you have cancer, it's not necessarily going to cure it, but it could stop it from spreading entirely. It's an algae that grows in the high country lakes here, and it's also full of nutrients, absolutely incredible, and we serve it with most meals at our events. So she had swelling and just general, damage, a dermatitis of some sort, or, in her appendages. And after I think only a day or two of chewing coca and the combo treatment, that swelling all but disappeared, like almost instantly. And upon her return to the United States, her last checkup for the cancer, the doctors said it was a miracle. And I'm not attributing that necessarily to combo, but I am saying that I think the integration of, oh, by the way, the reason she was having these issues was that she was taking chemotherapy pills. And so at the very least, I'm absolutely positive that the combo and possibly the coca, which has strong anti-inflammatory and sort of alkaloids that flush, you actually smell really bad if you chew coca all day or chew too much. And it's not too much if you need to cleanse, but if you chew a bunch, you'll smell body odor, just regular body odor, but like intense because it's flushing all this crap out. At any rate, I know for certain that it mitigated the effects of the chemo pills, and I suspect very strongly that this combination of things contributed to her, status that the doctors literally said is miraculous. And I would say it's because of the integration of these medicines with modern treatment techniques. That's really what's needed, because I earlier we were talking about how the superstition and the sort of archaic beliefs about this medicine, which I don't think are entirely wrong necessarily, but how that is kind of problematic. And so people reject modern medicine in its entirety, and I think that's also a mistake. If these plants aren't capable of the kind of renovations that modern medicine can be, certain modern medicines under certain contexts. I'm not saying that I'm a fan of big pharma or institutionalized medicine in general. However, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater kind of thing. But anyways, these medicines can definitely mitigate a lot of the toxic consequences of going through these chemical therapies and whatnot. So I wanted to mention that. And then also, combo as a psychotherapeutic agent is shocking to me because it's not psychedelic. if you've tried it, you know, it's not fun. You just feel sick, your face swells up, you throw up a lot. Every now and then it kills someone, and there's no way of knowing if that's going to be you until after you take it. Ayahuasca can do this as well, by the way. It's pretty rare, but it seems like some people have elevated serotonin naturally, and if they drink ayahuasca, even a small amount, they will get a toxic serotonin syndrome. And once that happens to you, you can survive it if it's not bad, but at a certain point, once it kicks in, there's no reversing it. There's nothing you can do for the person. Combo can do that as well. And it's not a matter of your facilitator being untrained or giving you too much. It's just some people have pre-existing medical conditions or are otherwise predisposed to having bad reactions to these medicines. That's all there is. Nothing in this world is totally safe. But anyways, for psychotherapeutic applications, I had a client who came here, unbeknownst to me, completely in the middle of a psychotic episode. It was initiated by an insane dose of psilocybin, 2 in a row. I don't know why this was done. He's fine now, largely because of combo and rape. But you know, when he got here, it didn't take me long to realize, like, we have Houston, we have a problem. And so first I gave him rape, the Geseleu golden boa, which is extraordinary. It's very difficult to get your hands on because it's only made by one maestro, and there are lots of copycats, but none of them are as good. So lucky for him, I happen to have that on hand. And after a couple of applications of that, I called a man that we know who is a Matsis healer. The Matsi are the originators of combo and probably Sananga, which is also an extraordinary tool in the right hands. But I called him to come and administer combo because just intuitively I just kind of sensed that that was the right thing. And I'll explain how we do that too, by the way. I think after the first application of combo, you know, he was after the rape, after like the first rape. And by the way, the way you can tell if you got the right rape for a person or for yourself, it'll make you incredibly sick. The stronger of a reaction you have to it, the more accurate the diagnosis was, you know, in terms of which rape to use. And it's a very strange thing because after you have worked this out, whatever it was, that same rape will not have that effect on you ever again. It's not a matter of tolerance. You can wait 6 months and take it again, and you will not react to it that way ever again. It's really an interesting thing. It's like whatever it's addressing. And also you'll notice your reaction will fluctuate. If you take a certain rape on like different days, it's not dose dependent. It has something to do with your energetic state, maybe your metabolic, you know, constitution at the time. But anyways, he had an incredibly intense reaction to it, and it straightened him most of the way out, but he was still kind of like, did you hear that sometimes? I'm like, no, definitely not real, buddy. So he was still kind of a little, you know, and after the combo, he was like 100% coherent again. So that is super interesting, that a severe psychotic episode can be stopped dead in its tracks with the right rape and 1 or 2 doses of combo. I think it was just 2. And not very many dots either, like 2 and then 3 or something, I think. He might even be in the chat and he could tell you. What do I think about schizophrenia? That's an interesting question because I actually had somebody lie to me once upon a time, because that's generally a disqualifier, right? If you have schizophrenia in your family, or you have it yourself, you know, and it's generally considered unethical to give you medicine. That's not really fair to these people that are suffering from this condition. It is risky, however, because even a person that is only predisposed but is not actively schizophrenic can trigger the mental illness, you know, psychosis, even episodes of PTSD, although anxiety, PTSD, depression, those type of things are generally assisted, even in cases where it's treatment resistant form of these things. So, the schizophrenia thing. I had a guy come, do you have any mental illness in your family? And this is something that people have lied to me about so many times. Please, you guys, don't do that to your facilitators. They don't deserve it. You're putting everyone in a fucked up situation. And luckily, in my case, it's never really been that problematic that person concealed their real mental health history. There's nothing I can do about it. You know what I mean? We can't force people to tell the truth. So I just wanted to take a second to say, please tell people. It won't necessarily even disqualify you. But at any rate, this guy lied. And then after, I think, the third ceremony, he just was like, man, I got to come clean. And there were other guests there too, and they didn't like this. And also, he said something really weird that sounded really bad after his confession. It turned out, I don't think, to have meant anything, but it was really unsettling for everyone else, And he's like, yeah, I'm schizophrenic, like full blown voices in my head, and I'm like, dude, what the hell, But it was like the third time, and he had not shown any adverse reactions. Not only that, he'd gotten better. So I made the decision not to throw him out, and he ended up staying for 2 months. And by the time we were done, he had very little signs of having any symptoms at all whatsoever. So, I am not necessarily advocating for giving schizophrenic people psychedelics, because there are many different types of schizophrenia, and every individual is different. You know what I mean? This is not something to be taken lightly. And if you're schizophrenic and you're watching this, I don't know if I would advise it, even though the one time I have seen someone, ingest these substances over and over again for an extended period of time, it did nothing but help him. It could be an idiosyncratic case. So that's the honest answer. I almost hated to say it, but that's my experience, and it's important to remember that it could be relatively meaningless. I kind of doubt that, though. Hey, what's up? Is it Funk Boy? Is that? I remember you told me how I'm supposed to say it, and sorry, I'm just looking for questions. I don't see any. So, by the way, Primal, I'll message you after the stream about the room. I don't think the apartments up there are available, and also you have to rent the whole building, which still isn't that much, but you probably would just want our room in the house, and also let me know how long, if you're just planning to come for a month or whatever it's going to be. So, by the way, you guys, please hit the like button, share, subscribe, consider becoming a patron. Our Discord community is relatively small, but people are building stuff that benefits all of us potentially. And I've really been inspired by the fact that I can seem to be able to motivate people to, bring them together and get them inspired to work together. Even though there's a very small number of them, the percentage that are actually willing to contribute to these projects is really mind-blowing, and it's really making me realize that if I could scale this up a little bit, we could really have some impact, and that's wild. So If you join the Patreon at the $10 tier and higher, you're actually contributing to something that's meaningful. It's not just about supporting a creator. And we're pretty kind to people. We have some of us have run into hard times financially, but still want to participate. And when I know that's really the case, I will just gift them a membership. And the community is pretty supportive, and people are actually developing meaningful relationships and stuff. So, and also the people that come to our events, almost all of them have come at least twice. I think a couple of them 3 times. So it's good. It's good stuff. So we've talked about combo. We've talked about ayahuasca. I don't think I feel like getting into neuroscience today. We'll do that in a later stream. Since Sananga came up, I'll talk a little bit about that. It's a really interesting plant. And the first time I came into contact with it actually was remarkable because my partner, she has pretty bad eyesight, and it helps with that. And so one day she said to me, we should try to find some Sananga. We were living in Ecuador. I went outside, and I think this plant hadn't bloomed before. And it didn't have very many leaves. She didn't plant it right or something, the woman that owned the property. And I think my partner had figured out what was wrong and like fixed the roots or something. So the leaves started coming in. But I still didn't notice. But it had bloomed. The same day my partner said we should find some Sananga. And I go outside and I look beside me and I see these pinwheel jasmine flowers, and I'm like, no way, man, come on. And so I broke one off and I saw the latex come out. I was like, you gotta be kidding me, man. Enrica, come outside, please. So we skinned some roots and made the Sananga. And the first time that I tried it, I had drank a pretty solid dose of ayahuasca with a friend of mine, and we both had the same report, basically, that at the peak of the experience, you put the eye drops in, and yeah, it burns, but it's not terrible, and the feeling was like being cleansed from the inside. Like if you could take your soul and put it in a washing machine that was also a massager or something. I mean, it was incredible. And the visions became incredibly crystal clear, and the depth was remarkable. And that only lasted for maybe 10 or 15 minutes, and then, you feel a lot better. And so one of the explanations of what actually transpires is that there is ibogaine in small amounts. It probably doesn't have much of an effect when you're just putting drops in your eyes. But the Quechua call it panema, which is like a energetic block or a sort of corrosion in your energetic body that causes like you don't want to work, you get lazy, lack of motivation, and it dissolves that. And that does seem to be the case. And so last year, earlier I mentioned the combo that was administered by Carlos Jimenez, the Motsi's guy, the originator of the original lineage, really, of the frog. And he was at my house for some reason, and he's like, yeah, blah, 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 last time I drank Sananga. And I was like, what? What do you mean drank Sananga? And I'd heard of this actually in Iquitos from that there was a rumor that some of the Shipibo had started drinking Sananga. Not a traditional practice for them, but they had started doing this, and now I know why. Actually, it's because Carlos goes there all the time now, and so do other Motsi's people, because it's become such a hub of plant medicine. I didn't like it there, by the way. What was I saying though? Okay, so so I realize that he's serious. And if you put it in your eyes, there's a couple drops, and you think about drinking it. You're like, yeah, I don't know about that. And he said, oh yeah, we drink it after combo, after taking combo, to help with the purging process, and to they sort of catalyze each other. And I was like, ooh, yikes, scary. But can I drink some? And he's like, yeah, I'll bring it over in a few days. So there's a video, you guys can watch it. It's not really, that amazing, or to watch me just get sick and kind of look swelled up eyelids, but it did, I think, really make me feel rejuvenated afterwards. And I think when you drink it, the ibogaine element is enough that it has a mild psychedelic effect as well. But the burning, it was really interesting when you swallow it. In the video, I think I first drink it, I'm like, no, that wasn't so, because the burning happens in your throat, going down your throat the same way it does in your eyes. And so I'm like, and then once it's absorbed into the bloodstream, it goes throughout the bloodstream, burning the shit out of you all through your entire body, which I'm sure has some sort of medical application. If my balls ever triple or quadruple in size, I may try it with combo together, just to see, and I'll report back to you guys about that experience. I think we're sort of running out of time, so if you guys have like AMA style interactions that you would like to. My father had schizophrenia. Okay, so we're still there. Yeah, if you guys have a few questions or comments, things you would like me to prattle on about for a minute, I'm going to do a music stream, and I have not dialed my shit in to the point where I'm satisfied with it still. So I have to do that before I do the music. Yeah, so this is turning into a part one because I just don't have 8 hours today to talk about everything that was particularly on my mind. We still have San Pedro to discuss. The overlap and the differences in the applications of all of these things is an important thing to be aware of. There are circumstances where ayahuasca is exactly what you need, and there are circumstances where it's the last thing you should touch. And the same is true of San Pedro, and the same is true of, it's more extreme with the more specialized plants, which is interesting. Adverse reactions to psilocybin are less common, and the reason in part is that it is not so highly specialized. I don't know how else to put it. It has like a broader spectrum, and unless you take like really high doses, a different sort of potency that's easier to navigate. Ayahuasca is more like a specific. It has more of a highly specialized application. I know I'm getting redundant, but that's really the only way I can think to put it. And as does San Pedro. And so whereas ayahuasca may help someone that has severe PTSD, it could also potentially backfire. But the chances of San Pedro causing a problem with someone that has these sort of inclinations, predispositions, is much, much higher, because anything that has like an amphetamine sort of effect is dangerous for people that have that kind of high strung sort of anxiety related type of condition. Right. So in the next edition of the what did I call this stream? Well, whatever, the truth about psychedelics. We'll get into some of these other things, and we'll also get into like the strictly chemical things like MDMA, ketamine, LSD. All of these things have their proper place and application. And I know one of the reasons I'm doing this actually is that I know a lot of people don't have the money to go to a clinic or to go to a retreat, and you're going to self applicate. I don't want to call it self-medicating because it has too much of a negative implication. And one other bit of advice I can give is that if you're going to do that, even if you don't particularly have any severe psychological aberrations or trauma or whatever, if you're really trying to get the most out of the experience of expanding your consciousness, and if you're trying to decode the universe or really get any sort of productive, make any sort of productive investiture from these psychedelic experiences, you have to develop your intellect just as much as any other aspect. In the Hermetic tradition, we call it balancing the pentagram, because each arm and leg and head of the pentagram represents a different aspect of fire, earth, water, air. So intellect, emotion, creativity, abundance, I guess, material resources, and spirit at the head of the whole thing. And that's really the bullet point of this presentation, that a lot of the misfiring that we're seeing from the psychedelic renaissance is due to a lack of holistic integration of knowledge and protocol. Yeah, mushrooms can be tremendously good for anxiety. And then let me see, Jacob Barber's whistleblower on UAPs yet? No, I have not. Okay, guys, I am going to wrap it up, but thank you so much for spending this time with me. I hope it was informative and amazing. And if you are interested in attending an event in the Sacred Valley, we're doing that until March. And then we'll be in Manu in the jungle, which is the best part of the jungle, from what I hear. In terms of the, how do you say it, intactness of the biodiversity, in May. So thanks so much. Please hit the like button, share, subscribe. We're demonetized, so support is awesome. And I'll see some of you, I'm sure, in the music stream in 1 hour.